kind of helping this high-powered offense, where when Childress had control of the offense here with the Vikings, it really wasn't that sort of offense at all, either in productivity or in style. But, it goes to show you that, in the NFL, I think you need to be able to adapt. And I think Childress has followed Andy Reid around and had a lot of success under Andy Reid and his offenses, but Childress wasn't exactly able to establish that here in Minnesota.
No, and that's, I always say, covering sports, so much of what happens is determined by personality traits. I mean, we can get into all the analytics you want, but somebody's going to basically, they're going to shade toward what they really believe in or who they are. And Childress came from the Andy Reid school. He wanted a West Coast passing offense, but he really wanted to run the ball in that offense. And he had Chester Taylor, and then he had Adrian, and it worked out, to a certain extent that way. But his best days were when Favre basically ignored him and just did what he wanted to do.
Yeah, and I remember earlier this week I was talking to somebody, and it was before we had this conversation with Nagy, but Childress used to quote some statistician in the NFL, and I forget what his name was. It wasn't a big name that anybody would recognize, but he had this stat, and I'm just going to make generalities here because I don't remember the exact stat, but Childress loved to reference it, and it basically said, if you run the ball, let's say 25 times, you win something like 80% of your game.
Yep.
Well, I mean, you're running the ball 25 times in a lot of cases because you've already built up a lead, you're trying to milk the clock, and your rushing has increased from, say, 16 carries through 3 quarters, and now all of a sudden you end up with 27, 30 carries at the end of the game. I always thought that stat was a little misleading because you're going to run the ball more late when you have a lead, and maybe you got that lead more through passing than you did through running the ball.
Right. Football situational. Those stats all drive me crazy, including you can also look up stats that says if you throw for 300 yards, you're probably going to lose. Well, it's not that throwing for 300 yards is a bad thing. It's that most teams that throw for 300 yards, or at least in the old days, did it because they were behind and they were playing desperation. It's a situational game. That kind of stuff drives me crazy. Doug Peterson, speaking of NFL coaches with a pedigree in Philadelphia, as I stretch hard to try to make a connection between Brad Childress and Doug Peterson. I'll let you explain what Doug's up to.
Well, I think this was more tongue-in-cheek, but obviously Philadelphia needs to win on Sunday, and they need the Vikings to lose on Sunday in order for Philadelphia to follow up their Super Bowl year with a playoff year. And so, Peterson basically said, I might call Matt Nagy and kind of offer him some encouragement and maybe some advice about, how to beat the Vikings. And maybe I already have, kind of playing it coy. Yep. I think he was more joking than anything. But Zimmer was asked about it, and he basically said, I don't care who Nagy talks to. I don't care who calls him, who he calls. We're just going into this thing trying to win the game. But to me, it's a little bit more spiced up when you consider the fact that Zimmer hired DiFilippo from Philadelphia and ended up, at odds with DiFilippo and his philosophy. So, frankly, I feel like Zimmer hiring DiFilippo was in part because of what the Eagles did to the Vikings in the NFC Championship game. And I think it might have screwed up how Zimmer approached the first month of the season with his own defense, trying to do a little bit too much. And once he sort of got back to basics and what has made Zimmer's defense so good over the years, then they started to get back to their same level of play. So I think, different teams are built differently. You have to play to your strengths. And, if Nagy's trying to do what Philadelphia was able to do, maybe there are some similarities there, but ultimately you have to play to your personnel and what you do best.
Absolutely. And the Bears do play to their personnel, including the way they use their very athletic young quarterback who's kind of blossomed under Nagy in a very interesting way. Let's talk about that. Do want to thank Tony Hoagland, Hoaglund, your State Farm agent. He's based in Champlin. He can work with you anywhere via app, phone, email, fax, carrier pigeon, whatever you like. He handles my insurance. He handles Michael Russo's insurance, so we think he's good.
Hey, Minnesota sports fans. This is your local State Farm agent, Tony Hoagland. I need you all to ask yourselves this question. If you're in an at-fault car accident and you are sued for $700,000, how much of that $700,000 will my current insurance company pay? If you are unsure or can't answer all $700,000, you need to give us a call. State Farm has been number one in car insurance since World War II and number one in homeowners insurance since 1964. For a no-obligation review of your current policies, call us at 763-421-4900 or check out our website at www.champlininsurance.com.
So what are the Vikings thinking about containing Trubisky?
Well, obviously you want to get pressure, especially on a younger quarterback, but Zimmer admitted earlier this week that he was even a little bit surprised by Trubisky's athleticism in the first game that they played this year. Now, clearly it wasn't the first time that they faced Trubisky, but I think they're going to view this a little bit more like they did Aaron Rodgers a couple of years ago when he was healthier, where, yeah, you want to get pressure on the quarterback, but you don't want to create running lanes for him, whether that's scrambling to the outside to buy time and hoping the coverage breaks down and you can pass it downfield, or more so in Trubisky's case, I think, giving him an opportunity to run for first downs, extending plays. I think it was 43 yards that Trubisky had rushing against the Vikings in that first meeting. So I think they're going to play a little bit more disciplined in their pass rush than they did in that first game. And perhaps even, if Trubisky starts to have some success, having sort of a spy technique on him, which they have done in the past, whether it's Russell Wilson, Aaron Rodgers, different athletic quarterbacks that they've faced in the past. So I think there's, obviously you don't want to take away too much of your pass rush or your coverage by doing that. But I think they have a philosophy of we want to keep Trubisky in the pocket and make him make reads against our coverage. So I agree with the philosophy, and if they can do that, I think that's going to bode well for the Vikings.
Barr has had his injuries this year. Kendricks now is dealing with some injuries. Eric Wilson and Ben Gettings, he's made some tackles. It seems like Eric Wilson's the guy who's taking advantage of these openings.
Well, yeah, Ben Gettingen is a good run defending linebacker, but Eric Wilson has more range, and I think he's able to take advantage of the opportunities when, as Zimmer has said in the past couple of weeks, teams treat Anthony Barr like he's a fifth pass rusher. And if they're going to do that and try to account for Anthony Barr, I think Eric Wilson is taking advantage of, hey, if they're looking Barr's way to come in on a blitz, it's a great opportunity for Wilson, several players away down the offensive line, to find an opening and get in there. And he did a really nice job, I thought. I thought he had a great game against the Lions, and that was playing in the role of Eric Kendricks. And a few weeks ago, he had a couple games where he was playing in the role of Anthony Barr, filling in for him during injury. So I think the Vikings have really found a good, versatile linebacker. There were times where I think Zimmer was a little concerned about his linebacker depth, but the emergence of Eric Wilson not only helps the depth for this year, but if they aren't able to reach a contract extension with Anthony Barr, I think they have a reasonably good option to plug in as a starter next year if Barr isn't here.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know about you, but I just don't sense that they're going to be bringing Barr back. I guess that the story is still being written, but I would be surprised, especially if you can come up with a competent backup who's going to make a small fraction of what he makes. But that'll be a subject for future times. The Vikings offense started very slowly in Detroit. The defense held in there and actually had caused some negative plays for the Lions that I thought kind of helped them get on track.
To me, it really looked like the Vikings defense, they did give up some yards and the Lions were able to get in position for field goals early, but I felt like there were several times that the Vikings defense was just dialed in, knowing exactly what play was coming, or, if we can get pressure on the quarterback here, we know he's going to dump it to a running back or a wide receiver on a quick screen. They diagnosed things very well. They ended up in the first half with 6 tackles for loss, which was the most they've had in any half this season. And, just they really, to me, kept the Vikings in the game until the offense could get things figured out. And for whatever reason, the Vikings started very slowly on offense. And, they had 4 straight 3-and-outs to start the game. And some of that you can attribute to field position, but ultimately, if you're starting at the 20, 25-yard line, you're not playing like you were backed up at the 2-yard line like they were on the one drive. This was it was a really bad offensive start, and I think the Vikings were fortunate that their defense was playing so well to hold the Lions to 9 points before the Vikings could score their first touchdown, and from there it became, Vikings down 9-0 to a blowout in this game. And I place a lot of the praise on the Vikings defense for how they played in that first half.
And Rudolph did have the big game. Even without the Hail Mary, he would have had a big game. The Hail Mary certainly made it a career type of game. Since the Hail Mary is kind of a flukish thing, let's talk about how he did within the confines of the normal offense. Do you think this was something that happened because of matchups, because of Stefanski, or is there another reason that Rudolph finally had a big game like this?
I think it's both of Stefanski and not trying to be this downfield passing game if they're going to take away Diggs and Thielen. And, the talk the past few weeks has been, they're getting doubled, but it's mostly on third down. And, Rudolph should be a really good option for them on third down. And I think especially it helps when you can get a bit of a running game going where you're not dealing with 3rd and 9, 3rd and 11 a lot of times. And if you're 3rd and 5, that's a great down for Rudolph to be an option. And I also believe that with them knowing how effective Rudolph was last year in the red zone, I think there's a little bit more of an emphasis on, hey, he's pretty special in the red zone for a reason. Let's get him involved there. So I really feel like with DiFilippo, the concentration was, well, Adam Thielen's off to a hot start, and Stephon Diggs is obviously a good receiver. We have to keep going to those guys. And I think with Stefanski, it's we have a very good running back who can also be a factor in the passing game with Dalvin Cook, and we have to keep defenses guessing and make other people threats when they are going to double Diggs and Thielen. And so Rudolph, to me, we talked to him today, and he seemed very refreshed, very honest, hopeful about where things are going with this offense. Whereas, after the last Chicago game, the middle part of the season, he was really frustrated to the point where he went and talked to Mike Zimmer about, I feel like I'm not being used as much in this offense, and I feel like I can help out the offense. And it really didn't change a lot in the following games. So, I think that may have contributed to DiFilippo's firing. But ultimately, I think it was a running game that had the biggest impact there. But, Rudolph getting involved is, a big part of this offense. And it seems like every year for the past 5 years, we've been talking about, there's a new offensive coordinator. This coordinator has a lot of experience getting tight ends involved. Well, we didn't see it early in the season with Rudolph getting involved. And he went a stretch of, what would it be, probably 12 games without a touchdown. So him having a big game, I think, gets him a little bit more engaged and gives defenses one more thing to think about.
One more segment to go. Thanks again to everybody who's listened and everybody who's sponsored. That's WizKids.tech, Twill in the Edina Galleria, MississippiPub.com, Beaver Island Brewing, Bite Squad, Fixologyrepair.com. Tony Hoagland, your State Farm agent in Champlin. One last time, the Bite Squad deal is now through morning of January 2nd. $5 off any $20 order. I want to make sure I get that right. $5 off any $20 order at bitesquad.com or Bite Squad app. Use a promo code FOOTBALL. But you can use it for other sports as well, obviously. And thanks to Brandon. TalkNorthPodcast@gmail.com is our email address if you want to advertise with us. And now let's get to the playoff picture.
Very simple. Vikings win, they're in. If they lose, they need Philadelphia to also lose for the Vikings to